Check.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. We are about to enjoy the talk by Eileen Wood about Blessed Carlo Acutis and you can't hear me? And the exhibit that we have downstairs. You are all invited afterwards if you'd like to and see the exhibit. It will also be in the downstairs hall through Thursday at 7 o'clock p.m. So you're all welcome to come down anytime during the week, and Eileen will take it from here.
Hi, everybody. So can you hear me? You all good? Okay. And I tend to be like speed talker, especially when I get going. So if I go too fast, just, tell me to slow down. Because that's just my nature. I'm just like always on the go and running, and so the talking can get ramped up. But I'm going to try really hard not to go too fast. And the video, I think that we're good there, right? I guess? Okay. I'm going to assume we're good. Okay, so thank you, Claire. Thank you for inviting us here to bring the exhibit and to have a talk. So my name is Eileen Wood. I'm from St. William's Parish in Tewksbury. Y'all know where Tewksbury is? It's not that far. This is a lot closer because some of the parishes were like down in Connecticut, like almost by New York, or up in Maine somewhere. So this was like a treat. Oh, Winchester. I know where that is. That's close by. So I'm married. My husband and I have 6 daughters and 9 grandchildren. So and I'm leaving tomorrow morning. I will not be here after tonight. I'm leaving tomorrow morning to go to South Carolina to babysit 2 of my grandkids for the next 2 weeks. So I'm like out the door. It's 6 o'clock. No, my flight leaves at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. And so my friend Joe will be here on Thursday. The exhibit's here through Thursday. So about it's like 17 years ago, I was on the parish council for my parish, and I was at a meeting one night, and I think I'm like probably half paying attention, probably doodling on the agenda, and my pastor said something. He's like, we had just had a 40-hour devotion, like a week or 2 before that, and my pastor says, that 40-hour devotion, that went really well. I'm really feeling, myself and this parish, that we're being called to have adoration 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Eileen, would you help me with that? I'm like, oh, so I better stop doodling and pay attention since he just called my name and volunteered me for something, right? So that was 17 years ago, and I'm like, sure, Father, let's do it. And we just started working on it. And I remember it was like during Lent. So it was during Lent, I said every week I put like a little educational piece in the bulletin about what is adoration, what is perpetual adoration, what does it mean to volunteer for an hour, and what are your commitments and stuff. So just every week we'd have little Q&A things to educate people throughout Lent. And finally, toward the end, we did a little survey, like, hey, who might be interested? Are you interested in taking an hour? Are you interested in dropping in? Like, if you're interested in taking an hour in the morning, in the afternoon, what days of the week, that type of thing. And then I just made a big spreadsheet, and I just started plugging names in. And it took us a little bit of time because the room wasn't ready yet either. It was a meeting room, so we had to tell everybody after this date there's no more meetings. We painted it, we got an altar, we had to get chairs and things like that. So we officially opened on November 26th, which was the Feast of Christ the King. It's the last year of the church calendar just before the beginning of Advent. So we have been doing this for 17 years. It's still open right now. Today there's somebody there right now. And all night long. And let's say like 12 years ago, we were getting ready for our 5th anniversary. And I was really excited. Like, this has been 5 years since we've had this chapel open perpetually. I thought that was a huge accomplishment. And so I was really excited about it. I'm like, we're going to do some kind of event. We're going to mark our 5th anniversary. We're going to have like a speaker or, I don't know, something. Like every year we did like a potluck dinner, but I want to make something extra special. And I couldn't I'm like looking around for somebody. I'm contacting different speakers, and we're looking for the end of November, and Scott Hahn wanted to come, but he wanted to come at like Labor Day. I'm like, that's 3 months too early. And it's like, no, it's not a good time. So I told him no, and I was still waiting and looking. So then in June, we went to Chicago. Our oldest daughter was graduating from college, and she was going to Chicago, and we drove. Now, I'm from Chicago originally, so I knew, you know how to get there. You get on Route 90, and you just go. You don't need a GPS. You don't need a map. Just get to 90 and go. Keep driving. There's no turns, no nothing. And so we drove overnight. It's like 18 hours, for the record, overnight if you don't really stop. And we went to the graduation. On our way home the next day, we had already done the all-night drive. So we said, well, maybe we'll get a hotel. And we started looking for hotels, but there's no hotels. This is a major highway through the center of the country. There are no hotels. We're calling on the phone. Everybody's booked. Can't find a hotel anywhere. finally, after like a lot of searching, we're getting more and more tired, we find one that's like 30 minutes off our road, off our path. So we have to take this 30-minute detour to find this hotel, which seems really ridiculous at the time, but okay. So we did. We stayed at the hotel that night. The next morning we get up and we went to Mass. It happened to be the Feast of Corpus Christi. It was a Sunday morning. And the priest at the end of Mass says, okay, so after Mass, if you go on the other side of the parking lot, there's a school building, and inside the school building in the gymnasium, we have this special exhibit on Eucharistic miracles. And we went there, and I'm like, this is it. Instantly, I knew. This is why God made us detour for 30 minutes out of the way to get to this hotel, to go to this parish, to see this exhibit. Because I had really been actively praying and looking for something. I couldn't find anything that I was happy with. I couldn't find, how do I want to celebrate this? I didn't know this exhibit existed. I had heard of some of the miracles. I knew of Lanciano and Orvieto and Bolsena, those the big ones, right? But I had never heard, I didn't know that there were hundreds like this, and I certainly didn't know that anybody had cataloged them, meticulously put them all together as an exhibit. So I was like, this is it, let's do this. We have like 6 months or something, 5 months to get it ready, let's do it. So I contacted the woman who was kind of in charge of it, and she sent me a DVD to print the posters. So I printed the posters myself. Our company, my husband and I have our own company, and we work in the area of fire forensics. So that means we investigate fires and explosions, and we do expert testimony for like depositions and trials. So because of that, in our office, we have a wide format printer. So it prints on rolls of paper, not like, you don't have like sheets of paper. It just comes out the roll, and at the end, it does a cut, So I'm buying rolls of paper, I'm buying ink, and I'm just like printing every day, another 3 or 4 posters, and a few another 5 posters, and just printing and printing. And I didn't have a big enough laminator, so I started going to Staples. I had to get them laminated there. My husband built the wooden stands. If you see downstairs, they're mounted on these wooden stands. He made those 12 years ago. He designed them and made that. And we had it for our 5th anniversary. But even at the time when I made it, I had in mind that I would keep show it at other places, because it's silly. It's like a lot of work and money and expense and stuff to do this for a one-time thing. So I'm like, no, we'll lend it to other parishes. But I didn't really have a plan to do that. Like I wasn't going to go to a ton of marketing. I mean, we had a lot of young children at that point. Our youngest one was born just a month before the chapel opened. So she was only like 5 at the time. And I had other ones older than her, so that were still little. So it wasn't like I could be out all the time doing this. So it kind of got out when somebody somehow heard about it through a friend, or I knew the pastor. I said, hey, Father, you might be interested in this. We weren't hiding, but didn't do an all-out marketing thing. So it got out maybe 2 or 3 times a year, something like that, maybe 4 times a year on a good year. And it was a big family event. Like, okay, we have another exhibit. Okay, everybody get in the car. We'd take the girls with us, and they'd be all excited to be doing the posters, because this was like an unusual occurrence. And it was something that was like a big family. We'd take them out for dinner, So we get to see some new church or some other part of where we're New England. And that's kind of how it went for the next, 8 years or so. And then, around maybe 2018 or something like that. See, up until this point, I had no idea where that exhibit came from. It was the Vatican International Exhibit on Eucharistic Miracles. So it must have been put together by the Vatican, right? Like some bishop in the Vatican, some committee in the Vatican. I mean, now it's kind of silly to think of it, because committees never do that kind of great work, but it was like, I don't know who came. It just came. It just showed up, right? It must have been from the Vatican. Do we have incense here? I'm like choking on something. So I didn't know where it came from. It was just this really cool exhibit, and it showed up, and it was approved by the Vatican or whatever. So then, my friend Joe, who was here earlier with me setting up, his wife, Alicia, and my husband and I, we used to do a lot of marriage prep together. We used to do a lot of different ministries in the church. So she knew what we were doing. She had done the exhibit with us before at her parish in Stoneham. And so she sent me an email and a link to an article, and she's like, oh, look at this article. There's this young boy in Italy. They think he might be the first millennial saint. He's going to be like the patron saint of the internet. And he was only 15 when he died, and they're exhuming his body. And then at the end, she goes, and he's the one who made that exhibit. I'm like, what? What do you mean, what exhibit? She's like, no, the one you show on the miracles. He made that. I was like, what do you mean he made that? Like, one person made that? And like, not just one person, like a young boy, if anything. I thought it was some older group of whatever, you know. She's like, yeah, he made that exhibit. So now I'm interested. Now I start reading about his life and studying about him, and I was really amazed at how much he did. So at that point, he was on my radar, and I'm looking. And also around, so maybe like a year later, they had the Eucharistic Revival start, and all these parishes appoint person to say, do something for the Eucharistic Revival, and a lot of them are like, well, I don't know what to do. Then they'd somehow find me, and like, oh, this will be our event. So the calendar started filling up, and I start getting all these calls. I'm looking like every day, every week, every month. We'd have a couple of months now, and then of course COVID hit, and everything cancel. Like, okay, we'll just wait. And by October of 21, I think the world started opening up again, and it's full. It's completely full. Instead of my calendar is just nonstop at this point. Instead of 2 or 3 times a month, we're like more like 3 to 5 times. I mean, 2 to 3 times a year. We're now like 3 to 5 times a month. It's more like 4 or 5 times a month. I think every weekend is booked now through June, and I already have bookings into July, August, September, and October. And every time I'll go do one event, I'll get 3 more phone calls. It's insane. So I'm just kind of trusting the Holy Spirit is directing this and what's going to happen, because I had never really planned it to be like this, big and enormous and crazy. So now we have the exhibit. Now about a year ago, so still what Joe and I would do, and at that point my husband was traveling for work all the time, so Joe was like, you know what, my work is a little more flexible, and I'm really interested in this ministry. We weren't doing marriage prep anymore, because that kind of dried up during COVID. So let's do this as our ministry. And so Joe's taking it on to help me do this. Now, around a year ago, so what Joe and I would do is we would go, drop off the exhibit, and leave, like we did this morning. And then we wouldn't come back again until we pick it up. It's like a year ago, I'm at adoration, and I'm praying, and I just had this inspiration thought. It's like, maybe you should get a relic. Like, would that be kind of cool? Why don't you request a relic of Blessed Carlo? Because people are starting to know who he is. He's on the news a little bit more on the Catholic, on the Catholic sites. There's little videos on him. I'm like, well, that'd be kind of cool. Well, I don't know how to get a first-class relic, so I don't know how you go about doing that. So I looked into it, and I'm like, okay, you got to do this and this and this. I just start working through it. Like, it seemed daunting at first, but you get your permissions from the bishop, and you petition, and you ask, and then like, okay, if you get it, you got to come to Assisi to pick it up. I'm like, I really wasn't planning on going to Assisi. And then I had a friend who was going, and it just worked out. I figured if it's God's plan, then it would work out, and it did. So a year ago, like beginning of May, was when, so I guess 10 months ago or so, I got the relic. 11 months ago, I got the relic. And around the same time, someone's like, well, okay, you have a relic. I'm thinking I'm going to go drop off the exhibit, drop off the relic. And then I'm going to come a week later, pick up the exhibit, pick up the relic. But, it's just interesting how things kind of morph. And someone says, well, wait, can you do a talk? Like, we'll have an event. Like, somebody can speak about this. Like, oh, well, that's an interesting thought. That sounds kind of cool. Yeah. So who wants to do a talk? Anyone? Like, that'd be a really good idea. We'll have a talk. We'll, like, bring the exhibit so somebody can talk. Someone can talk. Who wants to talk? Seeing no volunteers, it ends up being me. And now Joe does sometimes, too. When I'm away, Joe will also do a talk. But, yeah, it just kind of happened. I never planned on this. So now it's kind of come into this event, and it's like, I think it's even growing more, because about 3 weeks ago, I was in Spain. I was visiting my daughter. Our second daughter lives in Spain, in Seville, in the southern part. And I was going to visit her. It was just, I was on vacation. That's my thought. I'm thinking I'm going on vacation to visit my daughter for 8, 9 days. Apparently, the Holy Spirit had a whole other thing going on, because he had a different agenda, okay? 2 days before I left, these sisters in New Hampshire contacted me and says, oh, we just got approved to get a relic of somebody else, this St. Manuel Gonzalez. He's also called the Bishop of the Abandoned Tabernacle, and it's in Spain, and we had to go pick it up. So you're going to go to Spain. I know you're going to Spain. Can you pick it up for us? I'm like, well, yeah, it's in Madrid, though. And Madrid's like 6 hours away from where I'm going. I'm not even flying into Madrid. I'm flying in through Lisbon. And that's like, you come to Boston, go pick something up in Washington, D.C. or New York. I'm like on a different trip. So I asked my daughter, I'm like, can you see if somebody you have a friend who's going to go there and come back maybe? And she actually found somebody. But then when she talked to the nun in Madrid, Sister Monica, she says, oh, your mother's coming to get it? I don't even know what inspired her, really. She's like, I'm going to come down. I'm going to bring it to you. We're like, okay. And I'm going to take you on a little tour of St. Manuel's life. And I'm like, okay. Like, I was really interested, but she didn't know that. She didn't know me from a hole in the wall. Like, what if I was like, oh, why are you coming? I'm doing other sightseeing, you know? So she took me on St. Manuel's life, like all of his like early life, where he was born, where he was baptized, I mean, this whole tour for 1.5 days. And gives me and then she gave me, in addition to the relic for the sisters in New Hampshire, she gave me my own first class relic, because I have that too. And that can be a different talk some other time, we'll see. So I'm thinking the Holy Spirit is directing all this. I'm going to kind of leave him out of this, because maybe in the future we'll do this again. And then, now I'm back to vacation mode. So that was like Wednesday, Thursday. I'm thinking, okay, I'm back to vacation, whatever. My older daughter was teaching. She teaches English. That's what she's living in Spain, teaching English. She's teaching today. My younger daughter was with me. We were sightseeing. And like, who don't I run into in downtown Seville? Like, crazy as crazy can be. I'm just wandering downtown Seville, and I run into Blessed Carlo's mother. Like, she doesn't live in Spain. She's not Spanish. She's Italian. So how are we both in Seville at the same time? And like, it's a big city. So I just like, I'm like, the Holy Spirit is like doing something. So I just gotta like tighten my seatbelt and just like go with the flow. It's all good. So a lot of people ask me, how did you get this exhibit? How did you do this ministry? So that was kind of the answer to all that, because people keep asking me. So I thought, well, I'll let you know. So who was Blessed Carlo? He was born in London on May 3rd of 1991. Now his parents, he's not, British, he's Italian. His parents were doing some business in London for some period of time. They already moved back to Milan by September of that year. So he really spent almost no time in London. He was raised in Italy. He's Italian. His family was quite wealthy. They had servants in the house. They had, just servants. He had a nanny. They had servants. They're very wealthy business. He went to a prep school. He was like a modern family. I mean, I really try to impress upon people. Like, he was like a kid, like pretty much our kids today, in very, very much the same way. In similar family situations. I mean, not everyone's rich. I know, most of our kids probably don't have servants. I mean, I know my kids don't have a servant unless you count me, but in general, he went to school, like his friends. He wore modern clothes. He had a cell phone, right? Like, how many saints can you think of that has a cell phone? Like, not really any that I can think of. Obviously, the newer saints would be like Mother Teresa and St. John Paul II. But even them, I don't see any photographs of them with a cell phone. Like, Blessed Carlo made home movies of himself with his pets and his friends and the servants. He was an only child. He was kind of lonely, but he had a bunch of pets. He had like 4 dogs and cats or something. He loved the animals, and he did stuff with the servants, and he had a lot of fun, and he made home movies. He played soccer with his friends, and he taught himself how to play saxophone. He was very popular in school. He had lots of friends. He would talk with them on the phone. He would console them. His friend, one of his friends' parents were having a divorce. He's consoling the friends. Some kids being bullied. He would, protect them. He was just, like, in many, many ways, a normal kid. He was also normal in the fact of the religion in the household, right? Like, so a lot of kids, I know you talk to confirmation students, how many of them go to Mass? Hardly any, like maybe 10% if you're lucky, right? They come from families that just don't attend Mass. And people look at Blessed Carlo and, he must have been from this holy family, and his parents are doing the rosary every night with them. Yeah, the truth is, his family wasn't religious at all. His mother said she went to Mass 3 times in her life before Carlo, for her first Holy Communion, for her confirmation, and for her marriage. That was it. She didn't even go to that, like, Easter Christmas thing. And the father was pretty much the same way. So here he has 2 parents who, like, never go to Mass. And yet he had always this gift of faith that drew him to churches. Even as a young child, he wanted to go in the church and pray. He wanted to bring flowers to Mary. And then when he was 4 years old, his grandfather died. And at some point after that, his grandfather appeared to him and told him that he was in purgatory and he needed prayers. So here you have a 4-year-old boy whose parents don't go to church at all. So what does he know of purgatory? How does this work, But his nanny was from Poland, and she was faithful, and she knew her faith. And so she was able to explain to him, what purgatory is and how to pray. And he wanted to go to Mass every single day, pray for his grandfather, and just to be with Jesus. And, like, obviously, you're not going to let a 4-year-old out to go to church by themselves, right? Even if you're in a city and you can walk to the church, there's still 4. So obviously his mother or his grandmother or the nanny or somebody had to take him to church. And they said if there was some day that everyone was busy and they couldn't take him to Mass, he would just sit and pout. Like he wanted to go to Mass. He knew Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament from a really young age, and he wanted to be there in church. So as far as his classes went, he was kind of, average, not really excelling in things except for computer programming. When he was already like only 8 or 9 years old, his mother was buying him university-level textbooks, and he was teaching himself computer programming, like the actual programming, not, he would make websites where he'd actually design the site and program it. Like now, there's like programs where you can buy, like an app or something, it's like you plug this in, plug that in, this was early days, and he was doing the real programming. He made a website for his parish, he made other websites, just always to further the message of the Church, of Christ and the Eucharist. In fact, he received First Holy Communion a year before his classmates because he was just ready and wanted it and understood. A few years later, he was confirmed, and right after his confirmation, he started teaching catechism class. And he would share with everybody, in particular about the Blessed Sacrament, because he truly understood that Jesus was there, and he would share with people. And he shared, one of the men in the house, Rajesh, was an Indian from a Brahmin class, right? It's a priestly class, and he wasn't, Catholic at all. But just Carlo would just share with him so much, and the joy and the excitement, that he's like, I want to learn more. And he ended up wanting to become Catholic. And then what made him sometimes sad was he'd look at his classmates, and like they wouldn't want to go to church. I mean, like typical of like today, right? Kids today, they're not going to church. And Sundays he'd go to Mass, and he would see the priest really wasn't celebrating Mass with much reverence, and it would really bother him. But he really saw these people through the eyes of Christ, and it wasn't in judgment or condemnation, like, oh, they're so terrible, they don't go to Mass, or what a horrible priest. No, it wasn't like that. He was like, they must not understand, because if they just haven't been educated. If they knew, if they understood who was truly present on the altar at Mass, at consecration, they would never miss Mass, and they would have so much reverence in celebrating Mass. So it has to be, he's just giving them like all the benefit of the doubt. It has to be that they don't understand. And so what can I do? I'm going to try to educate them. And so he would have his parents drive him every weekend to different parishes throughout Europe, where they had a Eucharistic miracle established. And he started putting it on this website that he developed. So he's putting the information all the time on the website. He designed all those posters downstairs. He created that. The original exhibit had 159 posters, and that was from him. Now it's up to 187. So in recent times, you will see there are a few. In Mexico, there was something in 2006. In Poland, there was a miracle in 2008. So those are really like, he didn't do those. Those came afterward. But the bulk of it, like 95%, that's all his. It was just a few at the end. So he would research, and he made the whole graphic arts, how it has that similar look to it. It looks like you can tell it's the exhibit that goes together. And all the research, all the pictures, he did all that. And he did it when he was like 11 or 12. And as amazing as that is, you think, like, how could, like, for anybody to do that, even how old we are to do that, that would be a huge work. And we have the internet at our disposal. So, like, he didn't just Google stuff. He was creating the stuff that we Google now. A lot of that was his work. He was going and creating it. The internet was in its infancy when he was starting this. And he was taking the pictures and doing the research and putting that so that other people could then find it. So in addition to that, downstairs it has now 187 posters. He made 3 other exhibits. He actually made 4 exhibits in his lifetime. This was, I think, the first one when he was like 11 or 12. He made one on the Blessed Virgin Mary. He made another one on hell, purgatory, and heaven. And he made one on angels and demons. And each one is just as substantial, like over 100 posters. So it's like an incredible work. I mean, that one alone would be amazing. The fact that he did 4. And I haven't printed those yet. I'm thinking of it, but this is out like every week, and I don't have any more stands, so I don't even know what I do with another exhibit. But maybe in the future, we'll see. And I have the one downstairs. I have the entire thing in both English and Spanish. So some parishes are requesting it in Spanish, or like half and half. So what did he? What was the rest of his life like? So obviously he was a lot like normal everyday kids, but there was also something a little special about him. He knew that Christ was present in the Blessed Sacrament. He made it his mission to try to share that with other people. When I talked to confirmation kids, you got to kind of like talk their language sometimes. So I tried to explain to them, like, you know, when we get confirmation or any of the sacraments, we get grace with the sacrament, right? But we need to bring that grace alive in our life, right? So the example used for the high school students, maybe it'll help you guys too. So does anybody here like to drink chocolate milk? There's no one, right there. Fine. Thank you, Louise. At least somebody likes chocolate milk, right? My husband loves chocolate milk. So how do you make chocolate milk? Okay, milk and chocolate. But if you just put milk and chocolate, where's the chocolate? It goes at the bottom. Okay, so when you go, because you don't really have chocolate milk yet, right? So when you come to, let's say, confirmation or one of the other sacraments, you're going to get the grace. God's giving the grace. So you're like the milk, and the grace that God's pouring into you is like the chocolate. But if you just don't do anything more, the chocolate's like sitting around the bottom of the cup. So what do you have to do to make chocolate milk? You have to stir it. So in our life, we need to stir up those graces. So when you guys have next time you have a glass of chocolate milk, you can think about that. You need to stir up those graces. How do you stir up the graces? Well, what did Blessed Carlo do? He went to Mass every day. He went to adoration every day. He prayed the rosary every night. He went to confession every week or every other week. He had a spiritual director, right? He was studying about his faith. He was sharing with his faith. All that was agitating, all those graces he got, he was like mixing them up. So that stirring, that's us. So we're the white milk. The chocolate's a grace that God's giving us. Chocolate's delicious. Of course it's great, right? That's a great analogy. But it's going to just be, all that grace is just going to be sitting around our ankles. It's not doing anything unless we activate it and we agitate it and we work on making those graces part of our life and bring it alive. So what did he do? All those prayers and stuff. He also, because he saw a spiritual director, like, okay, we will never know what he said in confession because no priest is ever going to reveal that. But we have some inklings of what he struggled with because he used to do a daily examen and he wrote out notes and we have those notes. So the priest, if you have a good spiritual director, they usually tell you every night before you go to bed, do just a little review of the day. What was good? Where did we fail? How do we want to do better tomorrow? Like just kind of checking in spiritually. And so he would make notes for himself. What was he struggling with? What was he trying to improve? So some of the things he said was he would struggle with idle chatter. So he's with his friends and he's chit-chatting. I mean, a lot of us, at least hopefully it's just innocent idle chatter, right? Because I think it's something a lot of us can get involved in, and hopefully it's not too much griping and gossiping, right, to get to the next level of bad. So, okay, he struggled like all of us on that. He also struggled with, he said, distractions while saying the rosary, right? I think that's something that a lot of us can struggle with too, right? It's hard. I mean, you're trying to pray and you're thinking, oh, like I have, what am I going to make for dinner? And I have this to do for work tomorrow. And I got this, and I got these chores to do, right? So it's hard to like just focus and really be present with the rosary. So he struggled with that. And these struggles are human, but the key part is he recognized the struggles and he was working on improvement, right? He would also struggle, he felt, with a little bit of gluttony. Now there's a picture, he loved Nutella. He could eat the whole jar of Nutella. And he loved video games. And so when he's sitting around eating Nutella all day long playing video games, he might put on a few pounds. If you look at the pictures downstairs, you'll see that there's a poster board where he's a little rounder face than some of the other ones where he's thinner. So he started fasting. He started not eating as much Nutella. Maybe on Fridays or different days he would fast. So he learned this. He learned the virtue of temperance, to enjoy the good things of life, but also to fast from them, and that's what we do in Lent, but even throughout the year. And it was interesting because on the video game thing, he loved to play video games, right? He imposed a discipline on himself. And his mother's very clear, this did not come from her. It was purely something he did himself. He would only play video games 1 hour per week. Like, I know you tell a lot of kids today 1 hour per day they're going to have heart failure. You tell them 1 hour per week, it's like, you're crazy, you've lost your mind. And, or if it's not video games, Snapchat or Instagram or TikTok or whatever they're doing. But he didn't want to become a slave to it. But I think it's really important to look at that virtue of temperance and say, look, he enjoyed things. Sometimes people can take it to extreme, and like if they're all everything's a sacrifice nonstop. They never enjoy life. And you see some people, they just have this dour look on their face, they're never happy. It's like, no, he enjoyed life. God gives us this beautiful world, beautiful nature, beautiful foods to eat, delicious foods to eat, friends, all this goodness. He enjoyed all that. But then he also said, no, God, I'm going to give you back. Like, because I enjoy it so much, because I know this is good, I'm going to also, at certain times, sacrifice. And to see that balance. And I mean, sometimes I know in our world, it's all fun. It's all party, no sacrifice. Other people can do all sacrifice and no party. We want to have that balance and recognize and enjoy the goodness that God gives us. And Blessed Carlo did that. There was a really cute story where one time he told his mother, oh, Mama, I asked Jesus for a very big favor, which sounds kind of funny, right? Like, but Jesus was his best friend. He talked to him every day. So when he's your best friend, you can ask for favors, right? I mean, we should talk to Jesus. We should ask him for favors. I mean, you do that for your friends on earth, right? Hey, I need a ride to the airport. Can you drive? I needed this. I needed that, right? And they ask you, and this is what friendships are about, right? So he asked Jesus, he said, I would really like to see the dolphins, not like in the oceanarium or on the television. I want to see them in real life, out in the ocean, in their natural environment. So a couple months later, he and his family are out in the boat, and who do you think showed up? The dolphins, right? And he got like a little private show. He asked Jesus, his best friend, to see the dolphins, and he got to see the dolphins. Again, he's enjoying the goodness of nature that God created for us, and so he understands that. There's, that's how life is, right? It's not only sacrifices. When he was 15 and a half, it was the beginning of school year, end of September or so, beginning of October, they just started school. He was so excited to go back to school, be with his friends. One day he came home from school and he was kind of a little tired, like he was really tired that day. And over the next couple of days, he was not really feeling that well, but a bunch of kids at school had the flu, and they're like, yeah, he probably has the flu, no big deal. And, 3 or 4 days went by, and he was still just not feeling that well. And then a few other symptoms, he had like a sore throat, like his neck was a little swollen. But again, it was still mild, like, you get the flu, and sometimes it takes a few days to get over it. A few days into it, his symptoms got much worse. And they took him to the hospital, and it was discovered he had an acute form of leukemia. From the day that he was diagnosed to the day he died was about 5 or 6 days. It was very, very fast. He was all swollen, and when they arrived at the hospital, I guess he went to 2 hospitals, he went to one, and then they transferred him to another one that they had more special equipment to try to save him, but it was a very fast, aggressive form of leukemia. He told his mother when they got to the second hospital, he's like, Mama, I'm not going to get out of here alive. Like, prepare yourself. I want to leave the hospital, but I know I'm not going to leave alive. God's given me this beautiful alarm clock. Get ready. That he knew that this was what was going to happen. His parents were still in shock, in disbelief. They're like, no, at the last minute, God's going to come in and save him, but that's not what happened. It was October, his official date of death is October 12th, 2006. That was when his heart stopped beating. He actually went into a coma on the 11th. He was considered brain dead the day before. And they told his parents, he's brain dead. He's not, this is it. But they said, we're going to leave the machines or whatever until his heart stops beating. And so the parents went home. And about 6:45 the next morning, they got the call that his heart had stopped beating. And the mother went over to tell the grandmother who was living with them. And she said, that Carlo had died. And she said that the grandmother said she knew because she heard a voice. She heard his voice saying, Grandma, I'm in heaven now with Jesus. I'm very happy. Don't be sad for me. So when he was dying in the hospital, they said it was very painful. From other people, it said it was very painful. His arms and legs were very swollen. He's having trouble breathing. They had the CPAP on him, and he was uncomfortable with that. He found that kind of torturous, but he would never complain. They would ask him if he was in pain, and he would only say, others suffer more than I do, and I'm offering my sufferings for the church, for the Pope, the church, and so that I don't go to purgatory. I want to go straight to heaven. So he had that goal. And I tell that to the, especially the confirmation kids. I try to get out of them. I'll ask them a question. I'll say, do you guys have a goal? Well, they're all in high school. They're planning for college. Or they're going to go to trade school or something. They should have something in mind. Somebody's going to answer something. So they want to go to whatever college, or they want to be a doctor, they want to be a nurse, they want to be a lawyer, whatever. They want to be a basketball star. They want to be a plumber, whatever they want to be. So you get from them, okay, so how are you preparing for that? Well, you got to get good grades. You got to apply to the school, whatever. I got to apprentice. So there's a plan, they have a goal in life. Or even, I want to get married, you got to find a husband or a wife, right? I want to have children. So there's a plan, and they're focusing on what their goal is, and they're going to work toward that goal. So Blessed Carlo had a goal, and I try and tell the kids, those are all good goals. There's nothing wrong with that. But we also had to have an additional goal, and that's true for us, because we may have goals of, vacation in 6 months, or retirement, or whatever, right? You should have, every single one of us should have another goal. Our goal is to go to heaven, right? We want to be a saint. Who doesn't want to be a saint? Because there's really only 2 alternatives. So you want to be in heaven as a saint, because the other one's really not that pleasant. But we need to make that our goal. So it's not just like you haven't given a thought. You want to have that as a purpose in life, so that you're living that intentional life. And if you think about that, so if you want your retirement portfolio to be so much money or whatever, you look at the stocks, and you make decisions. You might look at it regularly, maybe even every day, and you plan for stuff, and you're constantly thinking about it, looking at it, right? So in the same way, if we make heaven our goal, we think, I want to get to heaven, and you think about that every single day, that will direct how you live your life. And that's what Carlo did. He made heaven his goal, so that was directing everything he did. He wanted to be with Jesus in heaven. That was his life's goal. So he offered his suffering for that. He also told his mother that he wasn't afraid to die, because he had spent his whole life only doing things that were pleasing to God. And that's an amazing statement. I don't know that everybody else can say that. I'm not sure I could say that. But regardless of what our past was, we can start today and make that another goal. I mean, it's kind of the same goal, right? That part of our goal to every day only do things that are pleasing to God, right? A lot of us maybe have things in our past that right here, start here, where we're not proud of that we think we could have done better. We can't change the past. I mean, the great saints who had really bad past, St. Augustine to start with, right? That's okay. At a certain point, you change, and you make that your focus. So I really invite everyone to make that goal today. We make that goal heaven, and that we always do things that are pleasing to God. So Carlo's a great example for us to look at his life and it was simple. He did extraordinary things, but in the course of everyday life, he was a normal kid. He was around. I think we were all alive during his lifetime, right? If you're 16, you'd have to be under 16. Today he would be only 31 years old. Most of us, I think, were born before he was. Right, we were around before he was alive. So we could have been if you took a vacation in Italy anytime, or in Europe anywhere, you could have been like I met his mother. You could have been in the same restaurant with him or something, on the same beach. Isn't that crazy? And now he is in heaven with God. So we have his relic downstairs. I want to say a few things about relics and what relics are. So there's 3 classes of relics. A first class relic is a part of the person's body. It could be bone or skin or blood or some kind of tissue. It can also be hair. So it has the person's DNA. The relic downstairs it's Carlo's hair. If you look at it, they look like little flower petals at the top. And in the petals, there's little black strands. That's his hair. The little black strands is his hair. So that's a first-class relic. Part of the person's body has their DNA. A second-class relic is some article that they used on a regular basis in their lifetime. So it could be some clothing that they wore. It could be, if it's a priest or a nun, like the habit or the vestments for Mass, right? It could be, like Padre Pio has his gloves. It could also be like a prayer book, like the priest prayed the breviary every day. It could be like a Bible that they used. So it's something like that was a personal item that the person used in their lifetime. A third-class relic is any kind of blessed or holy object that's touched to a first or second-class relic. So downstairs, there's some prayer cards. You can get a prayer card of Blessed Carlo. If you touch it to the reliquary, that will become a third-class relic. So then treat it with care and put it somewhere safe. If you have a scapular on, if you have a rosary with you, if you have like a miraculous medal or a crucifix or something like that, those, touch those will become third-class relics. Also, if you're married in the church, your wedding ring was blessed at your nuptial mass. It was part of the sacrament for your wedding. So you can touch your wedding ring. So that's the first, second, third class relics. Blessed Carlo died in 2006, October 12th, 2006. In 2009, in Brazil, there was a little boy named Mateus who was born. And Mateus was born with a really bad pancreas. Like, it just didn't work. And it didn't look right either. The pancreas was completely malformed and really not functioning. He suffered tremendously. He couldn't eat any solid food. So for his entire life, he was eating an all-liquid diet. Even with that, he had intense stomach pains, and he was constantly vomiting. At the age of 4, he weighed 20 pounds, which is, if you don't know what that means, that's really tiny. I have a 1-year-old grandson, and he's over 20 pounds. When he was 4, that would be 2013. His mother had known about Carlo, who was venerable at the time, Venerable Carlo, and she was doing a novena to him. And the priest got a second-class relic, an article of his clothing, and had it at the church, and they had some sort of either prayer service or talk, something like this. And afterward, the priest said, you can come forward and venerate this relic. So the mother told Mateus, so ask Carlo for something, pray for something. Well, okay, he's 4 years old, and he spent his entire life vomiting. It's not a big stretch of the imagination to figure out that he has to stop vomiting. As soon as he touched the relic, he was instantly and completely healed. He went home that night. His older siblings were having steak and French fries, and he wanted steak too. I mean, he's never eaten anything but a liquid diet. He's just watched his older siblings eating real food, right? They went back to the doctor, and there was no trace of anything wrong. They're like, well, how did you get like a transplant or a whatever? Like, the doctors had told his mother that he needed major surgery, but he wouldn't be able to live through it, that he would die. They told him he wasn't going to live to the age of 5. So now you go back to the doctors like, wait, this boy was dying. He was so unhealthy we couldn't even perform any surgery on him. Like, and now everything's completely working, and it looks, you do all the tests, the x-rays, the CAT scan, whatever, and everything looks normal, and they have the previous records. So that was the miracle that led to Carlo's beatification. So the church looks for, something kind of really dramatic miracle to show that that saint is interceding in heaven, and that God's, obviously God's performing the miracle, not the saint, but through that person's intercession that somebody got healed. Now there's other types of miracles. Usually it's something dramatic like that that's going to be for the beatification and the canonization. So in order for Blessed Carlo to become Saint Carlo, he needs another miracle. So if anybody here tonight, if you touch the relic and you have some sort of healing, you need to let Louise or Claire know, because they can get a hold of me, because I submit that back to the postulator. And so far with the relic that we have downstairs, we've already had 3 healings. And I just got it in May. We've had 3 physical healings. 2 of them, I don't doubt the healing at all, but 2 of them are less, it's harder to document. One woman was having chronic pain, neck, shoulder, back pain. She was always on drugs and heating pads and everything. And after she touched a relic, it's completely gone. Like, just no more pain at all. So, if you're in chronic pain and all the pain goes, that's a big miracle. And in addition to that, I have another friend. Well, I know her and I know this other friend, but they didn't know each other. And he saw her pick up the reliquary, and he said, that woman just got healed. Like, he knew she got healed. So somehow he knew that the healing was happening. And she didn't write to me till like the next day or 2 days later. Another person had a lot of chronic itching for months, like itching. And then she even said, so, Blessed Carlo, if she was thinking of maybe hosting an exhibit or something like that, she's like, if you want me to do this work, I need a sign. Like, maybe the itching can go away. And then instantly the itching went away. And then she did actually host an exhibit. And then the third one is actually a guy I saw. We had an exhibit in Lowell, and when the people came up afterward to venerate the relic, we had the Knights of Columbus, like the honor guard with the, when the knights get all dressed up with the swords and the feathers and everything, the feather caps. So he was part of that. And he had, as part of that uniform, he had gloves on. He had white gloves on. So then when he went downstairs, he was looking at some of the books, and I happened to be standing right there, and he took his gloves off because he wanted to flip through the book. When he took his gloves off, his hands were like all deformed. His knuckles were huge. the skin was just peeling everywhere. And there was a big chunk off his palm of his hand. It was really painful because it was under the deeper layers of skin. He couldn't really bend his hands. They were very stiff, very painful. And like the knuckles were all swollen. And he prayed. It was really interesting what he prayed. He prayed, he was touching his scapula to it, and he was asking Blessed Carlo to intercede that he would have a deeper understanding and commitment to the Blessed Sacrament. That was his prayer. That was his prayer intention. And then he added as a side note, if it's possible, could you just let me know you heard my prayer? Maybe my hands could get healed. He just kind of threw that in at the end. And the next morning when he woke up, even before he took his hands out from under the covers, he felt his hands, and he's like, the skin, because it was rough. It was all rough and like calloused. The skin was completely healed. And the knuckles weren't swollen, and he could bend his hands, and the pain was gone. And I saw him about 3 or 4 days after that. So I saw the bad, and then a few days later, he's telling me pictures. He sent writing to me the next morning, sending me pictures before, after, whatever, and then I actually saw him in real life. So I saw that miracle. That one's easier to, like, you see it, and he has all the doctor's records. So I sent that. I mean, I don't know what they're going to choose, because they need all the medical records. It has to be so dramatic. Because when you put it forward, and the Vatican's looking and looking, if they somehow reject it, it's bad. Like, it's a bad sign for the cause, and then you start from square one. Like, they don't submit, oh, here's 5 or 6, pick which one you like. No, you got to do that work first. The postular has to do that first, and you submit one, and the Vatican rules on that. And so you don't want that one to be rejected, because then you go back to square one. So, I mean, who knows? You could have a miracle tonight, but we don't need to get caught up on only the physical miracles. I mean, yes, those are the ones that go to beatification, canonization, typically. But, you may be really struggling in your marriage. Or you know somebody else who's. I mean, I know a lot of marriages, they're not even married. They're like roommates. They're living in separate rooms. They barely talk to each other. Maybe you want to pray for that healing of your marriage, or your friend's marriage, or your sibling's marriage, or something. And that could be a miracle right there. You might have a child, especially when he was like a young kid, right? You may have a child or a grandchild who doesn't go to church, who doesn't have faith, and all of a sudden you're praying for them, and the next day, next Sunday, yeah, maybe I'll go to Mass with you Sunday, who knows? It might be dramatic. It might not be overall dramatic. It might be a slow process. Doesn't mean it's not a miracle. It doesn't mean God's not hearing your prayers. I mean, God always hears your prayers. How he answers it and what time frame, that's up to him. But, so, pray, and I encourage you also to pray is the number one thing, really, to deepen our faith in the Blessed Sacrament for ourselves and for those around us. So, his body was exhumed in 2020. And he's currently in a glass coffin in Assisi. There's actually a photograph downstairs of that. He's not actually technically incorrupt. He looks good. His body was mostly there. It was considered intact, but it's not fully incorrupt. There was some decay in certain areas. But he looks good. He looks pretty good. But the idea of an incorrupt saint, that's a declaration of the Church. So, and they did not declare him to be incorrupt, even though it's kind of deceiving because you look at the picture, he really looks good, but that wasn't what the Church said, which is fine. So we always want to accept the teaching, what the Church's decisions. So onto the miracles downstairs for a little bit. There are, there's actually 162 posters up. I have 187, but I ran out of wooden stands. My husband needs to make more, and he's so busy working. We haven't gotten to it yet, but someday. But there's still plenty to read. In addition, there's a book that we usually have that has all the posters, the whole 187 in book form. It's just like if you're getting tired standing there reading, it's a lot, and it's overwhelming mentally. You read, that's really fascinating. Then you go next, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. You know the next one, that's a lot to go through. I mean, it's going to be here for a few days. You can do a few every day, but you might want to share it with somebody else. There's a book that has everything just in book form. It looks exactly like that, but it's in a book. Unfortunately, I ran out, but I just ordered 200 more, and they will be here probably, they're going to come to my office on Tuesday. They'll definitely be here for Thursday when we close up the exhibit. So I think we have a piece of paper, and you can sign up to get one. Just give us your name and your phone number, and we'll make sure when they come in you get one. But that's what the book looks like. There's a few other books on there, too, about Carlo and stuff. So what are the miracles? they're set up in the exhibit alphabetically by country. So like Argentina, and then whatever happened in Argentina. Austria, whatever happened there. And then, I don't know, Belgium, I think is next. And then the cities are alphabetical. There are other ways to look at it too. Some of them are miracles with involving animals. So we've got St. Anthony. You know the St. Anthony when you lose your car keys? Same St. Anthony. In his lifetime, he had a miracle associated with the Eucharist, and it was involving a heretic, and they were fighting and stuff. And so I'll let you find that and read it. That will be in Italy, and the town is Rimini. It's Rimini. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not Italian. Rimini. Okay, so you can read that. There was another one almost like Carlo where a young girl was praying for her father had died, and it was about purgatory. Father appeared to her and needed masses for purgatory, how important masses are for releasing people from purgatory. And so that's in Spain and Montserrat. There are other healings. People had physical healings from the host. There were sometimes God wanted a new chapel or a church built in a certain location, so he had something happen, and the bishop understood that was where a chapel would be. Sometimes people did like crazy things, and I don't know why they would do that. So one woman decided to steal a host. She pretended to be Catholic, took the host, went home. I don't know what she was thinking, but she decided to put oil in a frying pan and fry it, like on the stove. Well, it started bleeding, spurting blood, filled the frying pan, spilled over onto the stove, onto the floor, all through her kitchen and out the front door, gushing blood. She came out running after it, screaming, which makes sense. And then the priest came and resolved the situation. That's not a good idea. And she figured that out the hard way. Other crazy stuff like that. There are some people who lived on the Eucharist for a substantial number of times, for years. Like one was like 10 years, another one was like 26 years, one was like 53 years. She ate nothing but the Blessed Sacrament. I mean, how do you do that? So those posters there, you can read about that. That was just a little taste of what's there. So there is a different category of miracles where there's been extensive scientific study. The first one that most people are familiar with was in Lanciano, Italy, and that was in 750. The priest was doubting the true presence, and it bothered him because he knew that he was supposed to believe in this, but he's like, but I don't, I'm losing my faith. I'm like, I'm like, what does this mean? And so he was praying to God for a sign that, like, he didn't want to lose his vocation and his faith. And when he celebrated Mass, when he lifted the host, it turned into flesh, like actual flesh. And then the chalice turned into actual blood. And he immediately, like, repented and said, oh, no, now I believe, and I'm so sorry that I didn't believe. That miracle is still present today. You can go to Lanciano. That was around in the 700s. You can go to Lanciano in Italy, and it's there, present. You can see it. And the blood has coagulated into 5 droplets. And they're different shapes and different sizes. And somebody one time decided to do an experiment. Says, I wonder how much they weigh. And let's see how much, if some weigh more than others. So they took like a pan balance. We've got, scales on either side to see which one's heavier. And he put 2 drops on one side and 3 on the other. Well, now they're all different sizes and shapes. And so it's possible, right? You can get to the 2 are the big ones and the 3 maybe are the small ones, whatever. He got them to balance. Okay, that's possible. But then they start mixing and matching. And any 2 against any 3 balance. Well, now that's kind of weird. And if you do 1 against 4, that all balances. And if you weigh it, 1 weighs the same as all 5. Well, how's that work? Well, obviously it doesn't work short of a miracle, right? And why would that be? Because every drop of blood, every particle of the host is Jesus, all Jesus, body, blood, soul, and divinity. So Jesus on one side of the scale is going to balance off Jesus on the other side of the scale, and they're going to weigh. And if you weigh Jesus, however much he weighs, 1 or all 5, so it just helps us to remember, like, every particle of the host. I remember when I was a kid, they used to have, the altar boys used to have the paten under your chin, right? And it made me think, why are they so, and then afterward the priest would be so careful, he'd dust every little particle of dust he'd be getting off. And it made me think, like, why are they doing that? Oh yeah, because that's really Jesus, because this is something special. Because if you just eat in a cracker, who cares? It's like you get crumbs all over the place, whatever, they'll vacuum it later, right? And sometimes I think because we don't have the paten, we're not on the tongue anymore, sometimes people don't really remember. It's not that constant reminder. So some of the newer ones, In Argentina, there were 3 in 1992, 1994, and 1996. Those happened at the time when the Archbishop of Argentina of Buenos Aires was Jorge Bergoglio, who is the current Pope Francis. There was a miracle in Mexico, in Tixla, Mexico in 2006, and in Sokola, Poland, I'm sorry if anyone's Polish, I'm sure I butchered that name, in 2008. All right, so I'm going to just kind of summarize those together, the modern ones, the ones that happened, in the last like 20 to 30 years. So what would happen in each case? The host was found in some weird place after Mass. So the Eucharistic minister or the sacristan would go to the priest and say, "Father, I found this like host. It was, in the back of the church. It was in the poor box, and it's like really dirty." So normally what the priest can do is he can just consume the host. Like, that's fine, he could just consume it. But in this case, they were like, there were cobwebs and dirt, and he didn't really feel comfortable consuming it. So the protocol we're supposed to do is put it in a little bowl of water and put it in the tabernacle and just let it dissolve. And after it dissolves, in the sacristy, there's a special sink. So all your sinks at home and everywhere else, you put the water down. When it goes out down the drain, it goes to the sewage system. But there's a special sink in the sacristy that oftentimes has a cover with a key, so nothing gets in it. They only open it when you need to use it, and that's not connected to the sewage system. That's going under the church. Like, this is all holy ground, consecrated holy ground to be a Catholic church, and it goes under the church, just right to the ground, back to the earth. And so that would be the proper way to dispose of anything that's connected with communion that needs cleaning. So they did that. And they come back 3 or 4 days later, and they're like, "Yeah, it's not dissolved, and it's something weird. Like, it's changing, and it's got like this pinkish thing. I don't know, is that mold or what is this? We don't know. We're gonna put it back, and we'll figure it out later. We'll come back next week." And they'd come back, and it wouldn't, like, it'd be changing or growing, be looking like blood, something like, we don't know what's happened, but something weird's happening. And some of them were left for years because nobody knew what to do with it. Like, well, what do we do? And the priest would, maybe ask the bishop and stuff. At a certain point, the bishop would give permission. Okay, some people are studying this. I'm gonna let you, let's do some investigation, see what is this. So what did they find? Same thing with Lanciano. The first thing is that it's human blood. And they've identified human DNA. It's blood type AB. Now, blood type AB is very common for people in the Middle East. It's also the blood type on the Shroud of Turin. And then they would say even more so, okay, where is this from? Where's this tissue from? It's myocardial tissue, specifically from the left ventricle. All these samples are the same. It's heart tissue. We hear of the myocardial area a lot now because of myocarditis, right? So people never heard that word before. Now they know what it is. Myocardial tissue from the left ventricle, a very specific part of the heart. Why is that? Well, the theologians believe that there's no accident that's myocardial tissue. I mean, God doesn't do anything by accident anyway, right? Like, when God does something, far be it for us to try and figure everything out, but he has a reason, right? So it's no accident it's myocardial tissue, because that is the muscle that gives life to the heart. The myocardial, that's what's giving life to the heart. In the same way, the Eucharist is what gives life to the heart of the church, right? Why is it the left ventricle? Because that's the source of purified blood, in the same way that Jesus is the one who purifies the church of her sins. So there's so much similarities or understanding the depth of why that would be. The DNA finding is kind of interesting because the scientists are really puzzled. They're like, okay, we know there's human DNA, but we can't sequence it. That hasn't ever happened before. Like, in all of the situations, we either say there's no human, we can't identify the DNA, we can't find DNA, or we find it and here's the sequencing. But this is unique. Well, Jesus had a human mother, but he didn't have a human father. So Jesus' blood is going to be different than all of ours because we have both a human mother and a human father. I don't know what Adam and Eve's DNA looked like, but whatever. They may have been like, I don't know, that would have been weird, right? We don't have a sample of that. Now, one person in particular is Professor Frederick Zuckerby from Columbia University in New York, was a renowned heart specialist and forensic pathologist. So what's a forensic pathologist? When you hear the word forensic, just like we work in forensics and fire forensics, that means you're doing something with the law. So you're investigating murders or crimes or something. Pathologist means you're dealing with, diseased bodies and people or whatever. Maybe you find somebody who died a long time ago and you got to figure out whatever. They gave him a sample and they did not tell him the source of the sample. Like, here, we're going to give you a sample to study. You just tell us what you find. So he had no idea it came from a host. Just here it is. Now, he's used to getting stuff like that because it's probably some murder investigation. So here's what he said. I want to read exactly what his findings were because I think it's interesting. He said, this patient had blood clots. He must not have been able to breathe at times. He wasn't getting enough oxygen. Every breath must have been painful for him, and he must have been utterly exhausted. He probably received some blows to the chest. Furthermore, the heart must have been dynamically active, meaning living, at the moment when you brought me the sample. We found intact white blood cells, which can only be transported in the bloodstream. So if there were white blood cells present, it can only be because you brought it to me while it was still beating. So he's basically saying, what kind of monsters are you and who did you kill? You tortured some guy, and then you took part of his heart while it was still beating. What were you thinking? What did you do? What is going on here, right? So what was he telling them? What was that story? The patient had blood clots. He must not have been able to breathe at times. He wasn't getting enough oxygen. Every breath must have been painful. He was utterly exhausted and received some blows to the chest. So what is that? What story is he telling us? The story of the crucifixion, right? And how do you die by crucifixion? Yeah, asphyxiation. You can't breathe. When you're in that, well, that's the risen Christ, but okay. Well, there, when you're in that awkward, to say the least, position, and your arms like that, you can't get enough. You're not able to breathe. Over time, your lungs start to fill up, and you actually die of suffocation and breathing. So for every breath, in order to take a breath, you have to push up on your feet, which are nailed to the cross, right? You have to pull up on your hands, which are also nailed to the cross, to lift yourself up just high enough to take a single breath. And what, about 15, 20, 30 seconds later, you got to do it all over again for 3 hours. Now, he must not have been able to breathe at times, okay, because you're waiting as long as you can wait, because you don't want to go through that pain, because you're enlarging the wounds of the hands, you're enlarging the wounds of the feet. Plus, you just got whipped, so you're probably scraping your back on the wooden cross, which I'm sure wasn't nice and smooth, adding splinters to the injuries. This is Lent. It's a good time to meditate on those sufferings of Christ. And to think about, for our life, well, what is Christ asking of us? A lot of what he's asking for us is not that difficult. Look at Carlo's life. So he went to Mass on a regular basis. Can you get to Mass? Obviously you should go to Mass on Sunday. Can you get to Mass a few more times a week? I don't know. Can you? I don't know. That's a question for you guys to answer for yourself. Can you pray the rosary every day? Probably, right? Rosary is really 15 minutes, maybe 20. I know I can waste 15 to 20 minutes frequently. Can you get to adoration? And because maybe, there's no adoration exposed in the monstrance nearby. But you can just show up to the church. There's a tabernacle. Jesus is in the tabernacle. There's even chairs right there, right? We should try to make a goal every day to just stop by. There's a book downstairs called The Bishop of the Abandoned Tabernacle, and that's from my trip to Spain. That's where I learned about that bishop. A fascinating read. Really, it's so rich, so deep, so profound. But yeah, he's talking about Jesus is in the tabernacle all the time. It's like another Calvary. He's lonely. Here he went and suffered for us, and nobody comes to visit him. He's in all these churches. I find for myself, I can drive by my church, half a dozen times during the day, because I'm running this errand, I'm running that. It's right down the street from my house. I run the Adoration Chapel. I'm the one who does the scheduling of it, and yet there's many times when I'm so good at getting that schedule done. I know who to text. I know who to call, I know who to email to get somebody in the chapel, but that doesn't mean that I'm going. And so this is something that I really need to examine, like, well, how many times I just drive by the church? Okay, maybe I'm busy, but I could still spend 5 minutes. I can still stop. And so for all of us, Jesus is there all the time for us. He died for us. He would have died, he would have suffered, died for all of us, but for each one of us individually. If you were the only one on earth who needed saving, he would have died for you and suffered all that much. And all he asks is just to love him. Do the prayers, go to confession, come to communion, go visit him in the Adoration Chapel or in the tabernacle, and he's there. So it's just something to think about and consider. The one last thing I want to just point out is that it's cool to have the relic. I mean, I love, when something's different, I love different. Oh, this is special, this is different, right? Absolutely. But we always got to remember that Blessed Carlo wants to lead us to Christ. And sometimes we can get caught up in like, oh, the relic's here. Yeah, okay, yeah, but Jesus is there every day of the week. Yeah, the relic's only here this week. Yeah, absolutely. Jesus is there every day of the week. And really, there's where all the true healing is. And Blessed Carlo should only be a vehicle to help us to go deeper in our faith, to help us to know Jesus better, to have a greater devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. And I'm not trying to lecture you guys. These are things that I think about for myself because, like, these are things that I struggle with, right? These are the constant reminders that we need to work with ourselves, and I think Lent is a great time to work on those. So that's pretty much all I kind of have to say, unless somebody has a question or... Yes? Oh, so how did I meet his mother? So we were walking around in Seville, and we had gone several times, like this was a really downtown area with lots of shops, and we were just walking around, and about half a dozen times we'd already walked by this one store, and it was the Daughters of St. Paul bookstore, and we never went in. We'd been there for like a week, and it was like the last day, or the second, it was Friday, and we left on Sunday, so it was like 2 days before we left. So my younger daughter, it was just the two of us because the older one was teaching, my daughter says, can we go in? I want to get a gift. Her godson just had a birthday, so I want to get a gift for my godson. I'm like, yeah, sure. I mean, I don't care, fine. We're not doing anything. We're just sightseeing. We're window shopping. Yeah, you want to go in? We go in. And although I'm telling her, this is the Daughters of St. Paul, and like everything's in Spanish here because we're in Spain. It's like, they're in Jamaica Plain. Like, that's where their headquarters are. And we have shops like, we can get it all in English, but yeah, whatever. Let's go. So we go in, and when I first walked in, we saw this line. I'm like, what are all these people here? Like, why are they, like, there was a line here, and then there was the cashier here. I'm like, they can't be waiting for the cashier because there's like a big gap, and they're just all standing here. So I'm like, I don't know what they're doing. And then there was some stairs going up to like the back part of the store, and they were kind of almost to the back of the stair, almost to the stairs. So we're like, whatever. We go back, and we're looking at stuff, and I was looking at like reliquaries because I got the new relic of St. Manuel. I'm looking at some of the relic. I'm like, I'm just going to buy it in Boston. I don't need to carry it back in my suitcase. And I'm looking around, and we're just killing time back there, looking at stuff all in Spanish. And then I'm like, okay, ready, let's go. So we've been, I don't know, about 15 minutes just poking around. And then we go to leave, and I'm tunnel vision out the door, and my daughter's like, oh, that's why there's somebody here signing, so that's why they're all waiting. And I took one look. I didn't even see her face. I just saw the side of her head. I just saw like that. And instantly, I'm like, oh, that's Blessed Carlo's mother. I knew immediately. I just saw barely half the side of her head. And I don't know, I just knew. I instantly knew who she was. And her book had just, so why she was there, her book had just come out in Spanish. So my daughter's like, oh, so do you want to get in line? I'm like, yeah, let's get in line. So we went back in line. But like, I had no idea. She lives in Milan. She's not Spanish. She happened to just be there that like few days to this book signing, and that's where we went. I didn't know. I'm thinking the people in line knew that she was coming, but I didn't know that. I was just walking around. The Holy Spirit led us there. So I told her that I had the exhibit. When I got to talk to her, I told her I had the exhibit. I told her that what I'm doing, and so she gave me her personal email and phone number and said, let me know, and she wanted to know about the miracles we've had and stuff. So now we've been sort of corresponding. Any other questions? So I will be downstairs for a little bit. I don't know if you'll be here. You're open till 9, I think, right? The exhibit's open till 9. I'm not sure I'll be here till 9 because I have a 5 o'clock flight or 6 o'clock flight tomorrow morning or something ridiculous like that. So I need to go home and pack and do a bunch of other stuff. But I'll go down for a little bit if anybody wants to talk to me. But thank you so much for your attention. Oh, and the relic is downstairs with the exhibit. So sometimes, we do veneration up here, but it's down. There's a little altar type thing, so it's down there.